Hi readers, welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads, and welcome to Thoughts on Books. Lee here, and today I will be giving you my thoughts on Brotherless Night by, I apologize for brutalizing this author's name, Ganeshananthan. If you've watched, you know my pronunciation, sometimes even of English words, isn't always the best. My mouth sometimes gets ahead of my brain, and anywho. So, before I give you my thoughts, let me tell you what this book is about. This was the Women's Prize for Fiction winner for 2024. I bought this months ago because I saw it reviewed somewhere else, either in an article or on social media. And on March 4th, the Women's Prize for Fiction long list for 2025 was announced, so I thought I might as well read this now. Jaffna, 1981. 16-year-old Sashi wants to become a doctor, but over the next decade, a vicious civil war tears through her home and her dream spins off course as she sees her four beloved brothers and their friend Kay swept up in the mounting violence. Desperate to act, Sashi accepts Kay's invitation to work as a medic at a field hospital for the militant Tamil Tigers, who, following years of state discrimination and violence, are fighting for a separate homeland for Sri Lanka's Tamil minority. But after the Tigers murder one of her teachers and Indian peacekeepers arrive only to commit further atrocities, Sashi begins to question where she stands. When one of her medical school professors, a Tamil feminist and dissident, invites her to join a secret project documenting human rights violations, she embarks on a dangerous path that will change her forever. Bottom line, Brotherless Night is a beautiful, powerful book that it taught me about a piece of history I was unaware of. That's the Sri Lankan Civil War. That war lasted from 1983 to 2009. Now, I can forgive myself for not knowing about it in 1983. I was only 13. But after 9/11, I swore I'd keep up on current events better, but this was completely off my radar. I love a book that teaches me something about the world that is true that I did not know. I still don't know everything about the Sri Lankan Civil War. I read a Wikipedia piece on it. I listened to an interview with the author the other day on a podcast. It wasn't from the other day, it was from like last June. And it is so complex, and not being a part of that society, I would not be able to even begin to do it justice. Now, one of the pieces of criticism I read about Brotherless Night was from a Goodreads reviewer, so take it with a grain of salt. And that was that it didn't focus enough on, I'm going to use these words interchangeably, the government or army, which is the Sinhalese faction, or the Indian peacekeeping forces. And for me, that was okay. She does touch on the things that the army does, or the government does, and the atrocities that the Indian peacekeeping force conduct. But for me, the focus seemed to be on the Tamil Tigers, I'm going to refer to them as the Tigers, and their own, becoming their own monster in trying to rebel against the government and establish their own homeland. They also don't allow for any dissent. And early on in the book, the army starts, referring to the young Tamil boys as militants. And Sashi says, see, turn a dead boy into a militant and his death is excused. But then the Tigers turn around and start doing similar actions. They start killing people who dissent against them. And the youngest of Sashi's brother actually, kind of helps Sashi make up her own mind about the actions of the Tigers-ish, because a classmate of his was killed, and she goes, oh, did you know him well? And he says, does it matter if we know him? So that to me is a main focus of the book. Another focus, because it's told from Sashi's perspective, is also about the role of women in the Civil War. There's a point early on where the army comes and takes all the young boys, including Sashi's youngest brother, and the women call out to the husbands, and the husbands are like, well, nothing we can do. And then the women band together. I don't remember how many, but I'm going to say 1,000 strong, and demand their sons back, and they get them back from the army. They say, if the men won't do anything, we should. And they're successful. Not long after she gets to college, Sashi begins studying under a teacher. Her first name is Anjali. That teacher is based on a real-life person, Rajani Tharanagama, who was murdered by the Tigers. She was a feminist and a human rights activist, and when she criticized them for their atrocities, they murdered her. So Anjali is based on Rajani. And they start a book club and start allegedly reading about feminism and other things. They don't meet very often. But one of the things that Anjali asked them is, can an organization that does not allow dissent be a feminist organization? And then later Anjali begins to, or really the back of the book is not correct. Sashi goes to Anjali and says, I want to be part of this, and kind of forces her hand so that they are documenting these atrocities committed by not only the Tigers, but also the Indian peacekeeping forces. I was horrified to read about what they do, and also the army. So, I think that is everything that I want to say about this book. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It is very powerful. It says a lot about civil rights and the world and human rights, and how if you are not careful, you can become the very monster that you're trying to fight. I gave this 4 stars. Only 4 stars because probably the last quarter, maybe a little bit more than that, started to drag for me. This book takes place from 1981 to 1989 and then ends in 2009. So it's covering a lot of years. But there's another reason that it dragged for me, and that is I started reading it on Thursday. I had to put it down on Friday, couldn't read on Friday because I had another event I had to attend, and then I picked it back up on Saturday. Well, when I have to put down a book for a whole day, I lose my momentum, and my reading suffers and my enjoyment of it suffers. So that is the only reason probably for 4 stars, is that it did feel a little long. That aside, I highly recommend this book. It is helping to focus the way I look at the world and the way I read news, because this is based on actual events. It's fictionalized, but actual events. Anywho, that's my thoughts on books. If you stuck with me for this long, as always, thank you for listening to my phone ping and sticking with me on my journey. Happy reading!